An ancient engineer that commands the very rain from the sky, listening to the hidden frequencies of rushing water to build flawless fortresses. No, this isn't high technology. This is nature's most patient and brilliant architect, the beaver. They aren't just stacking mud and sticks. They are fundamentally reshaping the soil, the atmosphere, and the local climate itself. Lean back and let the world fade. Because once you unlock the 7-million-year-old secret of these master builders, you will never look at nature the same way again. Welcome to the night, to that serene sanctuary that lies far beyond the whispers and the stars. Tonight, we do not turn our gaze toward the endless void of the cosmos or across the restless, churning surfaces of the oceans. Instead, we are going to gently slow down the rhythm of time and step softly into the quiet waters of an ancient architect, a creature that was masterfully reshaping the contours of the earth long before humanity ever dreamed of building its first cities. Working through the velvet cover of darkness, this silent engineer weaves entire worlds out of simple branches, cool mud, and the steady flow of water, transforming ordinary streams into thriving, flooded meadows. Tonight, we immerse ourselves in the life of the beaver. This is not the animated caricature of popular culture or the superficial subject of a standard nature documentary, but the true animal, complete with its enigmatic biology, its deep evolutionary history, and its quiet, monumental power to reshape the planet. There is a profound, healing magic hidden within the ecosystem the beaver creates, a stillness that coaxes a weary mind into peace. It lives in the slow, drowsy drift of the water, the faint evening chorus echoing across the pond at dusk, and the earthy scent of fresh timber and cool, damp soil. This is a world constructed not with frantic urgency, but with infinite patience, one branch, one deliberate effort at a time. So settle in completely now. Allow your physical body to grow heavy, wrapped in a comforting, blanketed warmth. Inhale slowly, filling your lungs without effort, and let your breath out softly, releasing the day. If you find comfort in these quiet, meditative journeys into the heart of science and the natural world, a gentle like and a subscription will help carry dreamy science stories to other tired minds searching for a peaceful place to rest. But for this moment, there is nothing else for you to do but listen, and let the slow, unhurried world of the beaver carry you gently towards sleep. Beavers hold the distinguished title of being the second largest rodents on our planet. For most of us, the word rodent instantly conjures images of diminutive, fleeting creatures. Perhaps tiny mice darting along the shadows of baseboards, or nimble squirrels scampering through high canopy branches. The beaver, however, exists on an entirely different grand scale of anatomy. A fully matured North American beaver can comfortably weigh anywhere between 16 and 35 kilograms, making it every bit as heavy as a substantial, medium-sized dog. From the very tip of its whiskered nose to the flat, leathery end of its broad tail, its body can stretch well over a meter in length. Within this vast taxonomic family, the only creature that surpasses them in sheer mass is the capybara, that barrel-shaped, exceptionally gentle giant that grazes along South American riverbanks. The beaver occupies the second spot on the global podium, and it carries that title with an unmistakable, quiet dignity. There is something deeply noble about the posture and presence of a beaver. To watch it sit perfectly upright, cradling its food in its nimble front patinas like a pair of small hands, while surveying its self-made pond with an expression of quiet satisfaction, is a masterclass in natural harmony. The sheer biological engineering behind this animal is nothing short of breathtaking. Its hind feet are broadly webbed and remarkably powerful, acting as perfect oars designed to propel it through deep water. In contrast, its front paws are smaller and highly dexterous, almost hand-like in their utility, perfectly adapted for gripping, carrying, and meticulously positioning materials. Their luxurious coat is a dense masterpiece of layered insulation, The underfur is packed so tightly and finely that water is physically prevented from ever reaching the skin. Over this base sits a layer of longer guard hairs that act as a sleek waterproof shield. A beaver can swim through near-freezing currents for hours and emerge onto land with its inner skin completely dry. Beneath the surface, their eyes are shielded by a completely transparent third eyelid, a nictitating membrane that functions like a pair of built-in swim goggles. Their ears and nostrils automatically crimp shut the moment they submerge, and their specialized lips conceal tightly right behind their formidable front incisors, allowing them to effortlessly chew through submerged timber without swallowing a drop of water. Every facet of the beaver is sculpted for a life lived between earth and water, between the bright surface and the dark deep, between tireless labor and profound rest. The tail of a beaver is one of the most astonishing, brilliantly multifunctional structures in the entire mammalian kingdom. Flat, expansive, and entirely devoid of fur, it is clad instead in a beautiful, textured pattern of dark, leathery scales, resembling a complex mosaic laid down by a master artisan. Measuring up to 30 centimeters in length and nearly 15 centimeters across, this unique appendage is an organ of extraordinary utility. When navigating the aquatic realm, it serves as a highly precise rudder, twisting and angling against currents to steer the animal smoothly around hidden obstructions. On dry land, however, its role completely transforms. It becomes a rigid prop, allowing the beaver to balance comfortably on its haunches while working, acting as a crucial third leg to create a stable, tripod-like stance. It is also a powerful instrument of communication. When slapped flat against the water's surface, it produces a sharp, echoing crack that travels vast distances, instantly alerting the entire colony to impending danger. Yet, perhaps its most sophisticated secret lies in its ability to regulate the beaver's internal thermostat. This organ is richly supplied with an intricate network of blood vessels running just beneath the leathery surface, allowing the beaver to radiate excess body heat into the air on uncomfortably warm days. When the weather turns bitter, the instinctual architecture of their circulatory system constricts blood flow to the tail, trapping vital warmth deep within the core. It is a biological radiator, adjusting silently and continuously beneath the awareness of consciousness. Early European naturalists were so utterly perplexed by this scaly, flat appendage that they occasionally classified the beaver as a fish, at least when it came to medieval religious fasting laws. In certain territories, consuming beaver meat on holy days of abstinence was deemed perfectly acceptable by ecclesiastical authorities, simply because the tail looked and felt so fish-like. Through centuries of human misunderstanding and bizarre classifications, the beaver paid no notice. It simply kept its head down, swimming through the currents and continuing to build. A beaver's teeth represent a continuous, relentless manufacturing process that openly defies both time and the hardest timber. Their front incisors are massive, elegantly curved, and impossibly durable, capable of felling mature trees that would easily test a human working with a steel axe. Unlike the dentition of the vast majority of mammals, a beaver's front teeth never reach a final length. They grow continuously from the root every single day of the animal's life. As the sharp tips are ground down by punishing labor, new tooth structure is constantly pushed forward from behind. This biological reality means that a beaver must chew. It is a fundamental necessity of survival, not merely a way to harvest building supplies or gather sustenance, but a vital mechanical process to keep its own weaponry from growing to catastrophic lengths. The coloration of these teeth is equally fascinating. Rather than the pale ivory or cream tones we expect in nature, a beaver's incisors glow with a deep, rich hue of burnt orange, almost like polished amber. This striking color is the result of concentrated iron compounds woven heavily into the outer layer of enamel. The presence of this metal makes the front face of the tooth drastically harder and far more resistant to fracturing than the softer, white dentin layer directly behind it. Consequently, as the beaver gnaws against dense wood, the softer inner surface of the tooth erodes at a much faster rate than the iron-armored front. This uneven wear pattern creates an incredible, self-sharpening chisel effect. The very geometry of the act of chewing guarantees that the tool remains razor-sharp. It requires no external honing, no maintenance, and no rest, only continuous employment and continuous renewal. The beaver travels through the wilderness as its own mobile machine shop, carrying the ultimate cutting tool wherever it wanders. Forever sharp, forever orange, forever expanding. Contrary to popular mythology, beavers do not actually eat wood. This stands as perhaps the most stubborn and widespread misconception regarding their species. When you witness a beaver methodically grinding its way through a massive tree trunk, it is entirely natural to assume that the timber itself is the intended meal. In truth, the dense wood serves purely as an architectural asset, dragged back to the dam or the lodge to be woven tightly into their fortress. What the beaver is truly seeking is the succulent, living tissue hidden directly beneath the rough bark. They feed on the cambium layer, a thin, sweet, moisture-rich sheath of active cells that transports life and nutrients up and down the tree. They savor the tender bark, fresh twigs, and the green growth of specific trees, with willow and aspen topping their list of favorites. These specific tree species offer a brilliant dual advantage to the colony. They provide both a rich buffet and a sturdy supply of lumber. Even better, these resilient plants possess the remarkable ability to rapidly regenerate from their own stumps after being harvested. A beaver can fell a flourishing willow, consume the nutritious cambium, use the heavy logs for its local construction project, and return to that exact spot a few seasons later to find that the stump has erupted with fresh, green shoots, perfectly prepared to offer another cycle of food and fiber. As the warmth of summer arrives, the beavers expand their palate to graze upon lush aquatic vegetation. They drift slowly through the glassy waters of their ponds during the long, amber hours of summer twilight, gently tugging nutrient-dense lily pads, pondweed, and rushes up from the soft, muddy bottom. There is an almost prayerful, deeply meditative rhythm to the way a beaver feeds. The deliberate, unhurried pace, the quiet focus dedicated to every single mouthful, the total absence of haste, and the absolute lack of waste. It is a beautiful, serene acceptance of the bounty that the earth and water so freely provide. Under optimal conditions, a beaver can hold its breath for an astonishing 15 minutes. Beneath the mirror-like, motionless surface of a quiet beaver pond, life moves with just as much purpose and vitality as it does in the open air above. Beavers glide seamlessly through the submerged, hidden entries of their lodges, transport heavy branches from their underwater winter food caches directly to the dam, and meticulously inspect the structural integrity of their foundations, all without ever breaking the surface for a gasp of air. The beaver's internal physiology is exquisitely tuned for these long periods of aquatic suspension. The moment its head dives beneath the surface, an instinctual mechanism known as the diving reflex takes over. Its heart rate drops dramatically, slowing the body's overall oxygen consumption and prioritizing blood flow directly to the vital chambers of the brain and heart. While 15 minutes is achievable in normal conditions, during the frozen depths of winter when the water turns icy and their overall metabolic rate slows, they can remain submerged for even longer stretches, navigating the dark currents beneath thick ice sheets with a calm, freezing efficiency. They map this pitch-black, underwater kingdom almost entirely through an acute sense of touch and an impeccable spatial memory. They know exactly where each sunken log rests, where every branching tunnel curves, and precisely where the cold, muddy walls of the aquatic passageways give way to the dry, secure haven of the sleeping chamber above. To imagine oneself existing within the underwater sanctuary of the beaver is to imagine a state of absolute, suspended peace. The muffled, protective hush of water pressing gently from all sides, the soft, emerald gray light filtering down through a ceiling of ice, the silky resistance of the current against thick fur, and somewhere in the shadows ahead, the familiar texture of a branch waiting to be moved. Now let this profound, underwater stillness wash over your mind, and let yourself drift away into the quiet safety of the night. The beaver moves through its watery world with the effortless grace of an animal that is utterly at peace in its sanctuary. They belong to an elite group of creatures that possess the rare ability to radically reshape the very fabric of their environment. In the language of ecology, we refer to them as ecosystem engineers. Aside from humanity, no other living being transforms the landscape on such a monumental scale. When a family of beavers arrives at a new stream, they do not simply accept the conditions they find, they completely redesign them. With an instinctive eye for architecture, they select a precise location, a narrow bend where the banks are heavily forested with their favorite trees, and the topography is perfect for creating a wide, shallow reservoir. Then the symphony of construction begins, felling timber, trimming branches, hauling heavy logs, and packing rich mud. Over days, weeks, and months, a formidable barrier rises from the riverbed, holding back the current. The water swells and spreads outward, swallowing the dry land. Meadows dissolve into vibrant wetlands, and fast-flowing, crystal-clear streams slow to a tranquil, silted crawl. Yet out of this dramatic transformation comes not ruin, but a breathtaking explosion of life. The reservoir born from a beaver dam quickly becomes one of the most species-rich habitats in the entire temperate world. Insects flourish in the sun-warmed shallows. Frogs and salamanders seek out the muddy shallows to lay their eggs, and fish arrive from connected channels. Herons and kingfishers gather along the banks to hunt, while ducks nest safely in the thick reeds. Even playful otters arrive to slide through the currents spilling over the crest. The sheer biological diversity of a beaver pond can be many times greater than the simple stream that existed before it. And at the heart of this thriving oasis sits the beaver, patiently and meticulously adding another branch, smoothing another handful of clay, and quietly tending to the endless, peaceful business of sculpting its world. The scale of these natural monuments can be truly staggering. The grandest beaver dam ever recorded on Earth spans an incredible 850 meters across a remote, untouched expanse of Wood Buffalo National Park in northern Canada. That is nearly a full kilometer of meticulously interwoven timber, mud, and stone, constructed entirely by generations of rodent hands. This colossal structure was so vast that it evaded ground surveys entirely, only to be discovered through satellite imagery looking down from space. Scientists tracking the site estimate that this masterpiece has been under continuous construction for several decades, a living legacy expanded and repaired by successive generations of the same family. The massive lake trapped behind it has evolved into a sprawling ecosystem of its own, a labyrinth of winding channels, quiet islands, and still backwaters reaching deep into the boreal forest. Yet even the most modest of these structures are marvels of subconscious engineering. A standard dam typically measures between 5 and 10 meters wide and stands about 2 meters tall. Its downstream face is crafted with a gentle, ramp-like slope, a design that forces the immense weight of the flowing water to press down and stabilize the structure, rather than washing it away. The upstream side is packed tight with a dense plaster of mud and organic debris, forming a nearly watertight seal. Water is allowed to filter through slowly at the base, effortlessly maintaining the pond's level while preventing pressure from building to a catastrophic failure. Remarkably, beavers monitor the health of their dams almost entirely by ear. The distinct sound of trickling water acts as an immediate acoustic trigger, compelling them to investigate. Absolute silence tells them their fortress is holding. If a researcher plays a recording of a running stream near a stable dam, the resident beavers will immediately rush to the speaker, and attempt to bury it under mud and sticks, responding to the mere phantom of a leak with tireless, devoted attention. While the dam secures the aquatic boundary of their world, it is the lodge that serves as the safe, warm heart for the family. A beaver lodge is a domed fortress of branches and mud, frequently rising a meter or more above the shimmering surface of the pond. To an outside observer, it appears chaotic, a random, tangled pile of debris left behind by a storm. In reality, the interior is a triumph of careful layout. Rooted firmly to the pond's muddy floor or built out from a secure bank, its walls are incredibly thick, packed with layers of clay that freeze into a concrete-like barrier during the winter, keeping predators completely at bay. At the absolute apex of the dome, the builders leave a subtle opening, not an entrance, but a ventilation shaft that allows fresh air to circulate. Because of this ingenious design, even when the brutal northern winter plunges temperatures down to -30 or colder, the sanctuary inside remains remarkably comfortable. The inner living chamber rests safely above the waterline. It is entirely dry and comfortably carpeted with shredded bark and softwood shavings to create a sleeping platform. Here, the entire family huddles together on freezing nights, their combined body heat trapped efficiently by the thick mud walls and the heavy blanket of snow piling up outside as natural insulation. Crucially, the entries to this fortress are kept strictly underwater. A beaver simply slips beneath the surface, swims through a short, submerged tunnel, and ascends into the dry living room. This means that while the pond is locked in ice, terrestrial predators are entirely locked out. Wolves, coyotes, and lynxes walk across the frozen surface, staring helplessly at the dark ice, unable to breach the fortress directly beneath their paws. Inside, the beaver family breathes the warm, humid air and sleeps in safety. Outside, the winter world stretches wide, silent, and bitterly cold over the frozen landscape. The snow falls, the ice thickens, and the beavers rest, completely hidden from the world. In the wild, beavers are among the most fiercely loyal and family-oriented creatures you could ever encounter. A beaver family, known beautifully as a colony, is anchored by a strictly monogamous breeding pair. These animals mate for life, a bond that is far more than a poetic romance. It is a highly practical partnership that ensures the survival of the entire group. A pair that has worked side by side for years develops a flawless shorthand, coordinating their logging expeditions and structural repairs with efficient familiarity. They share the heavy burdens of maintaining the lodge and raising their offspring, season after season, for as long as they both shall live. Remarkably, the adolescents from the previous year, known as yearlings, do not immediately leave. They remain within the household to act as older siblings, helping to nurse and protect the tiny new kits born in the spring. Consequently, a typical winter lodge is a bustling, multi-generational home, housing the parents, the newborns, and the yearlings all under one cozy roof. It is a cooperative community governed not by aggressive dominance, but by shared labor and mutual warmth. However, upon reaching their second birthday, the young adult beavers are gently but firmly guided out of the nest to find their own way. They disperse into the wider network of streams, sometimes traveling many miles through unfamiliar currents to stake a claim. They search for a new territory with rich stands of timber and a manageable current, a blank canvas where they can begin the monumental task of raising their own dam, their own lodge, and their own lineage. Some will not survive this perilous journey, as a lone beaver wandering through unknown territory is highly vulnerable to predators. But those that do prevail will find their space, settle into the quiet banks, and begin. They gnaw through their very first tree, drag the initial branch down to the water, pack their first handful of mud into the current, and the ancient, patient rhythm of building a world begins all over again. This ancient rhythm was nearly silenced forever by centuries of relentless human exploitation. Once, the North American beaver thrived in staggering numbers, with an estimated population between 60 and 400 million animals. Yet by the dawning years of the 20th century, heavy trapping had decimated their numbers to fewer than 100,000 individuals. A parallel tragedy unfolded across the Atlantic, where the Eurasian beaver, a cousin species that once spanned the vast wilderness from the British Isles all the way to China, was hunted down to a mere handful of isolated pockets, leaving only about 1,200 survivors worldwide. The catalyst for this devastating decline was the global obsession with their fur. The beaver's incredibly dense, velvet-like underfur possessed unique properties that made it the premier material for manufacturing high-quality felt hats. Throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, a fine beaver felt hat was the ultimate status symbol of style and sophistication for a European gentleman. The global market's appetite for pelts was completely insatiable. European beaver populations were entirely exhausted within just a generation or two of the trade's inception, forcing merchants to turn their eyes toward the pristine waters of North America. There, the exact same cycle of extraction repeated itself, only with terrifying speed and on a grander geographical scale. For a long time, the entire economic foundation of colonial North America was built squarely upon the trade of beaver pelts. The map of the continent was drawn not by random exploration, but by trappers searching for untouched rivers teeming with colonies. Fortresses were established at key trading junctions, and complex alliances between European empires and indigenous nations were forged, leveraged, and shattered, all for access to prime trapping grounds. Human empires even went to war, fighting bitterly over the right to claim the quiet world of the beaver. With the disappearance of these tireless builders, a profound silence settled over the valleys and waterways of the world. The ancient reservoirs they had lovingly maintained for millennia gradually collapsed, leaving behind fractured dams and desiccated wetlands. Migrating waterfowl were forced to seek alternative sanctuaries, and native fish vanished as streams turned erratic, shallow, and aggressively swift without the natural buffering of slow water management. Landscapes were stripped of a vital, structural heartbeat, yet humanity barely registered the magnitude of what had been broken. The 20th century, however, marked a dramatic turning point as concerted conservation initiatives breathed life back into both species. In North America, a powerful combination of legal protections and a shifting fashion landscape, where silk and modern synthetics permanently eclipsed the market for beaver felt hats, allowed wild populations to steady themselves and begin a quiet resurgence. Across the Atlantic, meticulous European reintroduction programs successfully translocated survivors from their last remaining strongholds in Norway, Germany's Elbe River, and a handful of other remote sanctuaries back into historic river basins. Today, these engineers have reclaimed their ancestral territories across Britain, France, Germany, and Poland. Predictably, this homecoming has not been without friction. In agricultural corridors, farmers working the fertile riverbanks occasionally clash with the newcomers when rising waters spill into active crops. Yet in countless other regions, their return is heralded as an ecological triumph. Straightened, artificially channelized, and biologically barren rivers are suddenly widening, slowing down, and exploding with a symphony of reawakened life. The dramatic saga of their near extinction and gradual recovery serves as a poignant reminder of the chaos that unfolds when a single keystone species is torn from its environment. Ultimately, it is a testament to the sheer resilience of the natural world and the unyielding willingness of a species to rebuild its empire, provided we simply step aside and grant them the space to do so. Beyond their obvious architectural achievements, these animals serve as invisible guardians of water purity, functioning as an automated, continuous filtration network for entire watersheds. A reservoir born from a beaver dam is far from a stagnant body of water. It is a dynamic, multi-layered biological processing engine, that purifies everything passing through its borders. The moment a rushing stream enters the quiet expanse of the pond, its momentum drops away entirely. This sudden deceleration forces suspended soil particles, heavy silt, and organic debris, which would otherwise cloud downstream currents and suffocate aquatic habitats, to settle harmlessly into the deep floor of the reservoir. Crucial organic nutrients that would normally be swept away and lost to the open ocean are instead trapped within this localized web of life. Here, they enrich aquatic flora, which in turn feeds flourishing insect populations, sustains diverse fish species, and ultimately provides a bounty for apex hunters like herons, kingfishers, and otters. This concentrated nutrient cycling creates a hyperproductive oasis that a free-flowing, unmanaged stream simply cannot replicate. In regions heavily impacted by industrial agriculture, where massive quantities of synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus regularly leach into regional waterways, these ponds step in as highly effective natural buffers. Empirical research confirms that water exiting a sequence of beaver dams is significantly cleaner and more chemically balanced than it was upon entry. By trapping surplus agricultural runoff, mitigating shoreline erosion, and fostering dense plant communities that lock down the banks, these structures do the heavy lifting of modern conservation. Consequently, resource managers and forward-thinking ecologists increasingly view reintroduction not merely as an idealistic wildlife goal, but as a highly practical, cost-effective water management strategy. It is a fully autonomous, self-sustaining water treatment plant operating flawlessly 24 hours a day, requiring no heavy machinery, no corporate maintenance budgets, and no human oversight. Just a dedicated family of builders working quietly under the stars. In an era defined by volatile climate shifts and increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns, these animals may very well be one of our most potent lines of defense against environmental extremes. A well-constructed dam does much more than establish a local pool. It creates a sprawling subterranean water vault. Currents that would typically rush downstream and cause flash flooding during intense wet seasons are caught and held back, charging not only the visible reservoir, but also saturating the deep water table of the surrounding landscape. This immense moisture reserve acts as an ecological bank account, lingering long into parched seasons when neighboring territories have completely dried out. In the arid landscapes of the American West, field researchers have documented that streams anchored by active colonies retain vital water flows for several weeks longer into severe summer droughts than comparable watersheds left empty. This deep saturation, coupled with the dense canopy of vegetation flourishing around the banks, gives rise to cool, highly localized microclimates. Life thrives here with exceptional vitality. Dense groves of willows and alders anchor themselves along the perimeter, their root systems drinking deeply from the elevated water table. When catastrophic wildfires sweep through these landscapes, these beaver-constructed wetlands transform into invaluable sanctuary zones. The lush, moisture-drenched green walls surrounding the water powerfully repel advancing flames. While the surrounding forests may be reduced to ash, these aquatic oases endure, offering a critical haven for wildlife fleeing the heat. Detailed studies of historic burn zones reveal that intense fires frequently lose their momentum or halt entirely at the borders of these saturated wetlands, hitting a living shield built from water, mud, and resilient willow groves. In states like California, Nevada, and Colorado, land managers are looking past traditional infrastructure, embracing these animals as indispensable allies for climate adaptation, a natural, decentralized method for restoring a landscape's innate capacity to hold water, resist intense droughts, and soften the blow of weather extremes. And through all this high-level policy, scientific debate, and strategic planning, the animal itself remains blissfully oblivious, simply focusing on the ancient, daily rhythms it has mastered for millions of years. Long before they assumed the role of climate adapters, the prehistoric ancestors of our modern builders occupied the Earth on an astonishingly grand scale. During the Pleistocene epoch, the dramatic geological chapter defined by sweeping ice ages, a colossal relative of our contemporary rodent roamed the primeval forests and expansive marshlands of North America. Known to science as castoroids, this ancient creature was truly monumental. A mature specimen stood roughly equal in mass to a modern North American black bear, tipping the scales at an estimated 200 kilograms and stretching a massive 2.5 meters from nose to tail. It holds the undisputed title of the largest rodent to ever tread the North American continent. Its dental profile was scaled to match, featuring immense, heavily ridged, curved incisors that continued to captivate paleontologists. Yet, despite its intimidating size and close relationship to modern species, Castoroids was likely not an architect. The unique patterns and structural composition of its giant teeth suggest they were optimized for digging into dense mud and shredding tough, fully submerged aquatic vegetation, rather than felling heavy timber. If this hypothesis holds true, the giant beaver lived out its days as a majestic, wandering grazer of primeval swamplands, rather than an engineer of rushing rivers. The intricate art of transforming landscapes, the deliberate, precise construction of wooden mud dams, appears to be a much more recent evolutionary breakthrough, unique to the modern lineage. Castoroids ultimately vanished from the fossil record roughly 10,000 years ago. As the glacial ice caps receded and global climate patterns shifted rapidly, its decline directly mirrored the arrival of early human hunters on the continent, spelling the end for this giant through a volatile mixture of habitat loss and hunting pressure. It slipped into extinction alongside the woolly mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths of its era, leaving its smaller, infinitely more adaptable, and relentlessly industrious cousin to inherit the winding waterways of the world. While modern variants may lack the massive physical stature of their Ice Age ancestors, their social sophistication is peerless, relying on a complex communication matrix that extends far beyond the iconic tail slap. The resounding, explosive crack of a heavy tail striking the water's surface is undeniably their most theatrical alarm, a percussive warning designed to startle predators and alert the family. Yet, day-to-day life within the territory is governed by a subtle, invisible language of chemistry. These animals are profoundly scent-oriented, establishing a highly nuanced network of olfactory signposts across the entire length of their domain. This chemical dialogue centers around a rich substance known as castoreum, synthesized within paired specialized sacs located near the base of the tail. Castoreum is an incredibly complex molecular cocktail made up of hundreds of distinct organic compounds. While it carries an overarching linguistic code that any member of the species can instantly decode, it also contains a highly individualistic chemical signature, a unique biological fingerprint specific to a single animal. To broadcast these messages, the residents carefully sculpt small mounds of wet mud along the borders of their territory, strategically positioning them near major aquatic intersections and heavily trafficked overland paths. These scent mounds serve as the community's bulletin boards, property lines, and enduring dispatches. A wandering stranger approaching the boundaries of an unfamiliar colony will pause deliberately at these markers, drawing the aroma deep into its sensitive nasal cavities to read the history of the locals. In an instant, the traveler decodes the resident's gender, its current reproductive readiness, exactly how many hours have passed since it stood on that spot, and whether the territory is aggressively defended or fading into abandonment. Depending on the data revealed in the scent, the intruder may choose to retreat quietly into the currents, or it may deposit a chemical countermark of its own, signaling its presence to the owners. Curiously, this secret wildlife language has been exploited by human civilization for centuries. High-latitude indigenous cultures traditionally utilized the substance for its potent medicinal properties. Later, master European perfumers coveted castoreum for its deep, leathery, vanilla-adjacent profile, recognizing its extraordinary capacity to bind volatile fragrance notes together and extend their longevity on human skin. For a brief window in the early 20th century, it even found its way into commercial food production, masked innocuously on ingredient labels under the generic umbrella of natural flavoring. Though synthetic alternatives have completely replaced it in modern pantries, luxury perfumery still occasionally employs this wild extract today, allowing the rich, warm territorial signature of a wild builder to drift through high-end urban boutiques as a rare note of ancient luxury. This mastery of chemical signposts and aquatic engineering is a direct evolutionary response to a striking biological dichotomy. While these creatures are models of absolute grace and fluid power within the water, they become profoundly awkward, vulnerable, and exposed the moment they step onto dry land. Submerged in their element, they operate with boundless confidence, navigating strong currents at speeds reaching 8 kilometers per hour. They can alter their trajectory with surgical precision, plunge to impressive depths, and transport surprisingly heavy construction materials while swimming against a stiff current. They are masters of the aquatic realm. They have physically sculpted the landscape to provide. The moment they cross the shoreline, however, their physical mechanics betray them. Their powerful, webbed hind legs are positioned far back on the skeletal frame, a brilliant design for underwater propulsion that makes terrestrial walking clumsy, inefficient, and exhausting. On solid ground, they move with a heavy, rocking waddle, dragging a massive tail and pausing constantly to rise up on their haunches to anxiously scan the horizon. They simply lack the anatomical tools for speed or agility on land. A focused farm dog or a solitary coyote can easily run down a panicked adult in the open woods. This stark vulnerability is the exact reason they organize their entire lives to minimize time spent away from the water. When harvesting timber, they prioritize trees immediately bordering the bank, carefully gnawing them so they tilt and crash toward the safety of the pond rather than deep into the forest. To close the distance to more isolated groves, they actively excavate deep, straight navigation canals into the forest floor, allowing heavy logs and branches to be floated safely back to the central reservoir rather than dragged painfully over open ground. They shift the bulk of their heavy logging operations to the dead of night, exploiting the pitch-black darkness to hide from terrestrial predators. Armed with exceptional auditory senses and an incredibly sharp sense of smell, they remain hyper-alert to the slightest shifts in their surroundings. A single snapping twig on the bank or an unfamiliar scent drifting on the evening breeze, and they vanish instantly, slipping back into the dark water with barely a ripple, diving deep into the shadows where no land-bound hunter can follow. These handmade aquatic highways can stretch for hundreds of meters into the deep woods, representing a brilliantly simple yet highly effective solution to the perils of overland transport. When a colony exhausts the immediate shoreline and sets its sights on rich stands of timber located deeper in the forest, they do not risk perilous, overland foraging expeditions. Instead, they choose to bring the water to the trees by digging canals. Starting at the high water mark of their main pond, the builders use their nimble front paws to clear away stones and scoop out heavy mud, using their stocky bodies like bulldozers to push debris aside. As they carve these narrow channels deeper into the landscape, the water from the central reservoir naturally rushes in to fill them, creating a perfectly navigable, calm waterway. The animals can now swim effortlessly into the interior of the forest along their own handmade highway, fell a target tree right at the canal's edge, and float the heavy, green timber directly back to the lodge without ever setting a single paw on dry, dangerous ground. Maintained, deepened, and extended over many consecutive years by successive generations of the same family, These networks evolve into intricate aquatic infrastructure. They link the primary reservoir to distant foraging zones, satellite pools, and smaller, secondary dams positioned further up the watershed. Seen from an aerial perspective, an active territory looks strikingly like a meticulously planned human canal city. A beautiful, complex labyrinth of channels, locks, and pools carved out of the wilderness through nothing but pure instinct, unyielding effort, and the slow march of time. This remarkable foresight transitions from a matter of convenience to a strict requirement for survival as autumn draws to a close, compelling the colony to secure an immense underwater food reserve before the arrival of the big freeze. In the northern and subarctic wilderness areas they call home, the onset of winter introduces a brutal, locked-down environment. The surface of the pond freezes into a thick sheet of solid ice, the deciduous trees stand bare, and the surrounding foraging grounds are buried under deep snow drifts. Yet, the family insulated within the lodge remains entirely secure against starvation because they plan with absolute chronological precision. In the frantic, hyperactive weeks preceding the first hard frost, the entire colony enters a state of near-frenzied labor. They fell and trim vastly more branches than they could ever consume in the short term, hauling the green timber back to the deepest section of the pool. There, right outside the submerged entry tunnels of their fortress, they forcefully anchor the base of the branches into the thick mud floor of the pond. This underwater cache, frequently referred to as the winter food pile, can grow to staggering proportions, often expanding into a dense, tangled mass several meters wide and taller than a human. When the heavy ice finally seals the world above, the family is comfortably locked into their dark, subterranean kingdom. Yet, their access to resources remains uninterrupted. They simply slip from the dry living platform of the lodge, swim through the darkness of their submerged tunnels, pull a fresh, bark-laden branch free from the preserving mud of the pile, and carry it back to the warmth of the inner chamber to dine in comfort. The near-freezing water acts as a flawless natural refrigerator, halting decay and locking in the vital nutrients of the bark and the sweet inner cambium layer for months on end. This caching behavior is a spectacular example of hardwired evolutionary programming. Young kits who have never lived through a winter will actively join the rest of the family in hauling timber to the pile as autumn wanes, driven by an innate biological response to the shortening daylight and dropping temperatures. The absolute urgency of autumn preparation is written directly into their DNA, a genetic clock that tells them precisely when to begin, and when their winter vault is full enough to outlast the cold. Tucked safely away within that winter sanctuary, the eternal cycle of life continues its steady march, culminating in the arrival of spring kits that are remarkably advanced from the very moment they enter the world. Born into the gentle warmth of the early season, these kits typically arrive in close-knit litters of 2 to 4, though resource-rich territories can occasionally support up to 6 newborns. Unlike the helpless, blind offspring of many other rodents, these young enter the world fully furred, with their eyes wide open and their sharp incisors already visible. Within a mere matter of hours after birth, they possess the coordination to explore the dry interior of the lodge chamber, and within days, they are taking their very first tentative swims in the internal plunge pools. They are far from graceful during these initial aquatic excursions. The natural buoyancy of a newborn kit is so intensely high that they struggle to dive, instead bobbing helplessly at the surface of the water like fluffy, oversized corks. Fortunately, their parents are models of exceptional tenderness and shared responsibility. Both the mother and father take an active role in rearing the young, meticulously grooming their dense coats, carrying them about the lodge, and gently nudging them away from the dangerous, underwater exits if they drift too close to the open pond. Remarkably, the teenagers from the previous year's litter also remain in the lodge to act as dedicated older siblings, participating heavily in kit care and demonstrating a level of cooperative, multi-generational parenting that is exceptionally rare in the animal kingdom. Throughout the spring, the interior of the fortress is a bustling hub of life, radiating warmth from huddled bodies and alive with the quiet, high-pitched squeaks of curious kits exploring the boundaries of their home. By the peak of summer, these young have mastered the water, swimming with fluid confidence and beginning to mimic the daily chores of the colony. They chew thoughtfully on small twigs, haul minor branches across the pools, and explore the safety of the Grand Canal networks. They are learning the ancient craft of engineering not through rigid instruction, but through the joyous avenues of play, imitation, and the irresistible, guiding pull of evolutionary instinct. As autumn approaches, they graduate into genuine contributors to the winter cache, proudly dragging their own small branches to the communal pile that will safeguard the family through the dark months ahead. The soundscape of a mature wetland at night is one of the natural world's most soothing and timeless compositions. Imagine standing quietly along the edge of a vast, hidden pond just as the last remnants of daylight begin to slip away. The sky is deepening rapidly, shifting from a warm, glowing amber into a soft twilight gray, before settling into a vast, velvety midnight blue. The first stars begin to puncture the high canopy, faint and shimmering. The evening air is crisp and heavy with moisture, carrying the rich aromas of deep, still water, damp earth, and the clean, unmistakable sweetness of chewed willow bark. From across the mirror-like surface of the pond, the stillness is broken by the soft, liquid sound of ripples expanding outward. A clean, V-shaped wake carves its way through the glassy water, trailing behind a silent, dark silhouette moving with absolute purpose. The traveler is charting a course toward the opposite bank, where a pristine stand of young aspens sways gently in the breeze. If you listen with absolute focus, you can hear the wet, heavy sound of the animal pulling its stocky body free from the water and onto the muddy shoreline. A brief, watchful pause follows. Then the rhythmic, hypnotic melody of logging begins, a steady, unhurried gnawing that echoes across the open water like a slow, patient drumbeat echoing from the trees. Right on cue, nature's chorus joins the performance as frogs begin calling from the reedy shallows. First a solitary, bold voice, then a handful of answers, until a full, vibrating orchestra fills the hollow basin over the water. Deep within the thick cattails, a nesting duck settles in for the night with a soft, contented murmur, while a solitary owl broadcasts a low call from the distant forest. Through it all, the steady gnawing continues, predictable and reassuring. The stars multiply by the thousands, their distant light reflecting beautifully on the surface of the water, rippling out in gentle waves each time the builder shifts its position on the bank. Suddenly, a sharp, woody crack splits the night air, followed by a long, cascading rustle as a young aspen loses its footing and leans into the dark. A resonant splash echoes across the valley as its upper branches embrace the water. And then, after a brief moment of quiet, the rhythmic sounds of labor resume. The precise trimming of branches, the maneuvering of heavy wood, and the patient, tireless transportation of materials that will occupy the builder for the remainder of the night. All around this quiet work, the great wetland breathes. The frogs sing their ancient songs, the constellations drift slowly overhead, and the world feels immensely quiet, beautifully old, and profoundly good. Spring inside the security of a well-maintained lodge brings the arrival of a new generation. Unlike the helpless, blind offspring typical of many other rodents, young beaver kits enter the world remarkably advanced. They are born fully wrapped in fur, their eyes wide open, and their teeth already present. Within a mere matter of hours after birth, these tiny kits possess the coordination to wander around the dry interior of the lodge chamber, and within days, they are taking their very first tentative swims in the internal plunge pools. They are far from graceful during these initial aquatic excursions. The natural buoyancy of a newborn kit is so incredibly high that they struggle to dive, instead bobbing helplessly at the surface of the water like fluffy, oversized corks. Fortunately, their parents are models of exceptional tenderness and shared responsibility. Both the mother and father take an active role in rearing the young, meticulously grooming their dense coats, carrying them about the lodge, and gently nudging them away from the dangerous, underwater exits if they drift too close to the open pond. Remarkably, the teenagers from the previous year's litter also remain in the lodge to act as dedicated older siblings, participating heavily in kit care and demonstrating a level of cooperative, multi-generational parenting that is exceptionally rare in the animal kingdom. Throughout the spring, the interior of the fortress is a bustling hub of life, radiating warmth from huddled bodies and alive with the quiet, high-pitched squeaks of curious kits exploring the boundaries of their home. By the peak of summer, these young have mastered the water, swimming with fluid confidence and beginning to mimic the daily chores of the colony. They chew thoughtfully on small twigs, haul minor branches across the pools, and explore the safety of the Grand Canal networks. They are learning the ancient craft of engineering not through rigid instruction, but through the joyous avenues of play, imitation, and the irresistible, guiding pull of evolutionary instinct. As autumn approaches, they graduate into genuine contributors to the winter cache, proudly dragging their own small branches to the communal pile that will safeguard the family through the dark months ahead. The soundscape of a mature wetland at night is one of the natural world's most soothing and timeless compositions. Imagine standing quietly along the edge of a vast, hidden pond just as the last remnants of daylight begin to slip away. The sky is deepening rapidly, shifting from a warm, glowing amber into a soft twilight gray, before settling into a vast, velvety midnight blue. The first stars begin to puncture the high canopy, faint and shimmering. The evening air is crisp and heavy with moisture, carrying the rich aromas of deep, still water, damp earth, and the clean, unmistakable sweetness of chewed willow bark. From across the mirror-like surface of the pond, the stillness is broken by the soft, liquid sound of ripples expanding outward. A clean, V-shaped wake carves its way through the glassy water, trailing behind a silent, dark silhouette moving with absolute purpose. The traveler is charting a course toward the opposite bank, where a pristine stand of young aspens sways gently in the breeze. If you listen with absolute focus, you can hear the wet, heavy sound of the animal pulling its stocky body free from the water and onto the muddy shoreline. A brief, watchful pause follows. Then the rhythmic, hypnotic melody of logging begins, a steady, unhurried gnawing that echoes across the open water like a slow, patient drumbeat echoing from the trees. Right on cue, nature's chorus joins the performance as frogs begin calling from the reedy shallows. First a solitary, bold voice, then a handful of answers, until a full, vibrating orchestra fills the hollow basin over the water. Deep within the thick cattails, a nesting duck settles in for the night with a soft, contented murmur, while a solitary owl broadcasts a low call from the distant forest. Through it all, the steady gnawing continues, predictable and reassuring. The stars multiply by the thousands, their distant light reflecting beautifully on the surface of the water, rippling out in gentle waves each time the builder shifts its position on the bank. Suddenly, a sharp, woody crack splits the night air, followed by a long, cascading rustle as a young aspen loses its footing and leans into the dark. A resonant splash echoes across the valley as its upper branches embrace the water. And then, after a brief moment of quiet, the rhythmic sounds of labor resume. The precise trimming of branches, the maneuvering of heavy wood, and the patient, tireless transportation of materials that will occupy the builder for the remainder of the night. All around this quiet work, the great wetland breathes. The frogs sing their ancient songs, the constellations drift slowly overhead, and the world feels immensely quiet, beautifully old, and profoundly good. If you examine a beaver's webbed hind feet closely, you will discover a fascinating anatomical tool perfectly adapted for their amphibious lifestyle. On the second toe of each hind foot, the animal possesses a split claw, a doubled nail that functions precisely like a fine, rigid comb. Known to biologists as a preening or grooming claw, it is a critical piece of survival gear rather than a mere anatomical quirk. The beaver uses this split nail to meticulously comb through its dense coat, disentangling mats, clearing out trapped debris, and maintaining the flawless alignment of the layered fur that preserves its buoyancy and warmth. For a creature that spends a massive portion of its life submerged in near-freezing waters, fur maintenance is a non-negotiable ritual. If a beaver's fur loses its tightly packed, waterproof structure, the icy water would instantly breach its defenses, draining its body heat with every dive and sending the animal into a fatal spiral of hypothermia. Working in tandem with specialized oil glands located near the root of the tail, the secretions of which the beaver manually spreads over its body, this grooming claw keeps the animal perfectly seaworthy, or rather pond-worthy. Watching a beaver tend to its coat in the late afternoon light is an unexpectedly endearing sight. Perched comfortably on a half-submerged log or a grassy bank, it works methodically through its fur, reaching over its shoulders and down its flanks with a flexible ease that belies its stocky, heavy frame. It oils its fur by rubbing the secretions along its sides, turns its wide, paddle-like tail this way and that to inspect it, and brushes its belly fur with focused concentration. Once the daily tune-up is complete, it simply slips back into the currents and disappears beneath the surface. Long before European colonization sparked the rapid collapse of their populations, beavers held a total monopoly over the hydrology of the North American continent. Experts estimate that an incredible 60 million or more of these animals originally occupied the landscape. At such a staggering density, they would have dammed and managed virtually every single viable stream, creek, and river basin from coast to coast, exerting an extraordinary cumulative impact on the shape of the land. Waterways that run fast, deep, and straight today through artificial concrete channels and human-engineered courses would historically have transitioned through endless, interconnected corridors of beaver ponds. These structures slowed the continent's rushing waters, forcing rivers to spread across wide floodplains, drop their heavy loads of sediment, and continuously replenish the underground water tables. The vast, fertile valley floors of North America, the historic meadows flanking great river systems like the Missouri, the Sacramento, and the Platte, were fundamentally sculpted by the collective labor of millions of beaver generations over thousands of years. Geologists have determined that the deep, ultra-rich topsoils of valley pastures across the American West, lands that have sustained heavy agriculture and grazing for generations, were built inch by the sediment-trapping behavior of ancient beaver dams. The early human pioneers who arrived to clear the land for farming were, without realizing it, building their livelihoods directly upon the ancient, recycled infrastructure of the beaver. This prehistoric network of beaver-engineered wetlands was so extensive that it likely played a silent, foundational role in dictating the migration and travel routes of the continent's earliest human inhabitants. While this theory explores more speculative anthropological territory, researchers suggest that a landscape saturated with beaver ponds would heavily dictate how early human cultures moved through an uncharted wilderness. In an era completely devoid of modern roads, bridges, or mapping, deep and volatile rivers stood as both formidable blockages and vital transit routes. Traveling bands had to cross rivers at natural fords, and these crossings were most easily located where a river widened, slowed down, and became shallow. Streams managed by beaver dams, which backed up into broad, tranquil reservoirs, offered vastly safer and more manageable fording options than deep, fast-running, unmanaged river currents. Furthermore, these thriving beaver ponds acted as reliable wilderness oases, providing human travelers with an immediate supply of clean water, a high concentration of fish and wild game, and an abundance of easily harvestable wood for fuel and emergency shelter. The historical trails and footpaths that early humans carved into the continent may well have been threaded deliberately along the borders of these wetlands, tracing a path through the aquatic network that the beavers kept functional. Indigenous nations across North America possessed an intimate, sophisticated understanding of the beaver, weaving the animal deeply into their cosmologies, oral histories, and survival practices. While the animal was hunted with deep respect for its meat and hide, it was equally revered as an intellectual equal and a master craftsman. In many tribal traditions, the beaver was honored as a profound teacher of the community, a living symbol of patience, foresight, and the enduring virtue of building structural legacies that outlast a single lifespan. While the North American beaver, Castor canadensis, dominates popular wildlife discussions, its close eastern cousin, the Eurasian beaver, Castor fiber, boasts its own extraordinary saga of survival. Though they share the same genus and mirror each other closely in terms of lifestyle and appearance, they are entirely separate, genetically isolated species. They possess different chromosome counts and exhibit subtle anatomical variances in skull morphology and castor sac structure, meaning they are completely incapable of interbreeding. The Eurasian variant historically occupied a massive geographical empire, stretching uninterrupted from the misty riverbanks of the British Isles all the way to the Pacific coastlines of Siberia. However, by the dawn of the 20th century, centuries of unmitigated trapping had driven the species to the absolute brink of cosmic erasure, leaving just 8 isolated remnant populations that totaled a mere 1,200 individuals worldwide. The largest of these fragile groups managed to cling to life in the deep, forgotten valleys of Norway, while tiny, vulnerable populations scraped by along Germany's Elbe River, France's Rhone Delta, and a scattering of remote eastern refuges. From these desperate remnants, conservationists in the mid-20th century launched an ambitious, historic reintroduction effort, translocating beavers back into their ancestral territories. The species was successfully returned to Sweden, Finland, Russia, Poland, the Netherlands, and eventually back to Britain, where the last native populations had been eradicated centuries earlier. The structural response of European river ecosystems to this homecoming has been met with widespread celebration among modern ecologists. The same grand story of environmental rebirth that transformed North American conservation is now repeating across the European continent. Streams are losing their erratic speed, wide ponds are reforming, historic wetlands are expanding, and long-lost native species are returning to fill the void. In Scotland, beavers reintroduced to the River Tay corridor in the early 2000s have successfully reclaimed a massive portion of the regional watershed. In Devon, a landmark trial on the River Otter was met with such overwhelming community backing that the animals were granted permanent, legally protected status as a foundational part of the river's ecology. Even agricultural landowners who initially fought the reintroductions due to local flooding have, in many areas, come to value these wetlands as crucial drought insurance policies and as beautiful features that draw ecotourism and positive attention to their land. One of the most compelling riddles in mammalian biology centers on how a beaver acquires its mind-boggling engineering skills. Is this architectural genius pre-programmed into their genetic code from birth, or is it a craft passed down through education and experience? The truth reveals a sophisticated blend of both factors working in harmony. The underlying, raw motivation to dam a current of moving water, excavate a subterranean lodge, and stockpile a massive winter food cache is entirely instinctive. Beavers raised in strict lab isolation, completely cut off from parents or older mentors, will still immediately attempt to build dams and lodges using whatever materials are placed in their enclosures. clumsily weaving together highly unnatural substitutes like plastic pipes, wooden blocks, and cardboard shipping tubes. The core blueprint and the drive to execute it are hardwired directly into their DNA. However, the true mastery of the trade, the ability to identify the absolute strongest topographical site for a dam, the perfect technique for layering mud to defy a powerful current, and the optimal layout for an expansive canal network, is refined through years of hands-on experience and social observation. Young beavers growing up within a mature, complex colony learn by watching the older adults around them. They observe, they copy, they practice, and over several seasons, they develop a structural fluency that transcends basic instinct. An adult beaver that has spent 5 or 6 years actively managing a changing pond system operates with a genuine level of site-specific expertise, possessing an advanced understanding of local currents and dynamic building techniques that is truly staggering to witness. Scientists tracking individual animals over multiple years have documented that veteran builders make fundamentally different, more sophisticated choices than inexperienced juveniles. They select superior geological foundations, minimize wasted energy during logging, and repair sudden breaches with vastly superior speed. They are, in the truest sense of the term, master craftsmen who actively perfect their trade as the seasons roll by. In the complex, high-stakes accounting of global carbon storage, these animals have unexpectedly taken center stage as incredibly potent secret weapons against climate change. When an active colony dams a stream and intentionally floods the surrounding woodland, the trees caught within the rising water table eventually drown and perish. On dry land, a fallen tree decays rapidly, releasing its stored carbon straight back into the atmosphere. However, the waterlogged depths of a beaver pond are highly anaerobic, meaning they are almost completely stripped of oxygen. This low-oxygen environment slows the natural process of decomposition down to an absolute crawl. Organic wood matter and plant debris that would rot away within a decade on a dry forest floor can persist for centuries when buried deep within the saturated mud of a beaver reservoir. Over long stretches of time, the continuous accumulation of this organic sediment transforms the floor of the pond into a massive, highly concentrated carbon vault. When these ancient dams eventually drain or are abandoned by the colony after decades of use, they leave behind what ecologists refer to as beaver meadows, ultra-fertile, flat-bottomed valleys whose soils hold an extraordinarily dense concentration of captured carbon. Comprehensive field studies confirm that the soils of these historic meadows can contain 2 to 3 times more locked-in carbon than the surrounding upland forest topsoils. They are, in essence, massive underground vaults of preserved organic history. As modern science frantically searches for nature-based solutions to offset global emissions, the beaver's role as an accidental carbon farmer has earned serious attention, burying the remnants of the past in the cool, dark sediment of its sanctuary, one quiet season at a time. The biological relationship between beavers and the fish populations that share their watersheds is an intricate, beautifully cooperative dynamic. In modern wildlife debates, beaver dams are occasionally mischaracterized as harmful, impassable blockages that disrupt the upstream spawning runs of prized fish like salmon and trout. While this can sometimes become a temporary localized issue in highly degraded, human-altered rivers that suffer from historically low flows, the broader evolutionary timeline reveals an entirely different reality. Migrating salmonids and wild beavers have co-evolved in absolute harmony for millions of years. Mature, healthy adult fish easily outmaneuver these structures during high autumn flows, vaulting directly over the crests of the dams or locating small, rushing side channels to slip through to reach their upstream spawning grounds. More importantly, the calm, nutrient-dense reservoir created behind the dam acts as an invaluable nursery and sanctuary for the river's youth. In these slow-moving, sun-warmed pools, juvenile fish find an endless abundance of insect prey and a critical haven from the fierce, exhausting currents of the main river channel, allowing them to conserve energy and grow significantly larger before risking the perils of the open ocean. The complex, tangled network of sunken branches and logs within the dam offers perfect hiding spots from sharp-eyed predators like herons and otters. Simultaneously, these deep pools remain reliably cool during scorching summer droughts and resist freezing solid during the depths of winter. Far from an obstacle, the beaver's architectural landscape serves as a protective cradle, ensuring that the currents remain vibrant, healthy, and teeming with life. The biological relationship between these aquatic architects and the fish populations that share their watersheds is an intricate, beautifully cooperative dynamic. In modern wildlife debates, beaver dams are occasionally mischaracterized as harmful, impassable blockages that disrupt the upstream spawning runs of prized fish like salmon and trout. While this can sometimes become a temporary localized issue in highly degraded, human-altered rivers that suffer from historically low flows, the broader evolutionary timeline reveals an entirely different reality. Migrating salmonids and wild beavers have co-evolved in absolute harmony for millions of years. Mature, healthy adult fish easily outmaneuver these structures during high autumn flows, vaulting directly over the crests of the dams or locating small, rushing side channels to slip through to reach their upstream spawning grounds. More importantly, the calm, nutrient-dense reservoir created behind the dam acts as an invaluable nursery and sanctuary for the river's youth. In these slow-moving, sun-warmed pools, juvenile fish find an endless abundance of insect prey and a critical haven from the fierce, exhausting currents of the main river channel, allowing them to conserve energy and grow significantly larger before risking the perils of the open ocean. Detailed comparative studies across various watersheds reveal that stream segments modified by active colonies boast substantially higher and healthier fish populations across a diverse array of species compared to unmanaged, straight-flowing channels. When the scorching heat of late summer arrives, unmanaged streams often contract into shallow, dangerously warm trickles that induce severe stress or trigger catastrophic fish kills. In stark contrast, beaver dam channels maintain deep, chilled pools that serve as vital ecological fortresses. These liquid sanctuaries provide critical climate insurance, allowing vulnerable fish populations to weather severe dry spells that would otherwise result in massive die-offs. The relationship is a poignant reminder that ecology is rarely defined by one-dimensional harm or benefit. Instead, it thrives on context, structural complexity, and a delicate environmental equilibrium. Beavers operate on internal rhythms that intimately reflect the natural cycles of our planet, yet they refuse to align themselves with human schedules. Primarily nocturnal and crepuscular, they restrict their heavy engineering and logging operations to the velvet hours of twilight, the deep night, and the misty arrival of dawn. Fascinatingly, their internal biological timepieces do not conform to a standard 24-hour day. Rigorous laboratory settings and meticulous field tracking have unmasked a startling physiological reality. A beaver's innate circadian rhythm operates on an extended cycle of approximately 29 hours. In the vibrant seasons of spring and summer, this elongated internal clock is constantly corrected and reset by external environmental cues, such as shifting light levels, the setting sun, and falling ambient temperatures. However, when the brutal northern winter locks the landscape in ice, this relationship with the sun fractures entirely. Confined within the pitch-black security of the mud-walled lodge, or navigating the dim, watery tunnels beneath a thick sheet of surface ice, the family may pass consecutive weeks or months completely insulated from the rising and setting of the sun. Under these constant dark conditions, their biological clocks untether from the surface world and begin to drift freely. They cycle through phases of intense labor, dining, and restorative slumber according to their primitive 29-hour programming, gradually slipping entirely out of phase with human hours. This remains one of the most evocative images of the winter wilderness. While humanity scurries across the frozen surface world, chained to rigid schedules and the shrill ringing of morning alarms, the builders beneath the ice drift serenely through a slower, elongated reality, sleeping, waking, and working in complete alignment with an ancient internal universe, utterly indifferent to the constraints of human time. The relentless quest for thick beaver pelts stood as the primary economic catalyst driving European explorers and trappers deeper into the uncharted interior of the North American continent than any other historical incentive. Majestic, powerful river systems that had never been documented by imperial cartographers were painstakingly tracked, navigated, and recorded by frontiersmen following the shifting distributions of wild beaver populations. Iconic waterways like the Missouri, the Columbia, the Snake, the Green, and the Platte, alongside an endless network of smaller tributaries, were first inscribed into European records by individuals tracing these rodents upstream. The legendary Hudson's Bay Company, established in the year 1670, was at its core a massive corporate beaver pelt enterprise. The remote trading posts it constructed across the wilderness eventually served as the structural seeds for modern cities. Its rugged trade routes laid the foundations for contemporary highway systems, and its expanding geographical intelligence formed the bedrock of early continental cartography. The political and geographic borders of modern Canada were quite literally sketched out along the trails of the beaver. This historical truth explains why the animal assumes such a revered status in Canadian national iconography, proudly adorning the national coat of arms, the 5-cent coin, and the corporate emblem of the Hudson's Bay Company. It is the official sovereign animal of the nation, a designation born not out of romantic sentimentality, but out of raw history. The country's foundational economy, its colonial expansion, and its geographic mapping were all radically sculpted by this thick-furred, orange-toothed engineer living its quiet life across the vast boreal forests. There is a profound, philosophically soothing quality to the beaver as an ecological symbol. It does not captivate our imagination through sudden, aggressive displays of power or majestic grace in the manner of a hunting eagle or a predatory lion. Instead, it commands respect through the steady, unyielding quality of its labor. The beaver is an animal completely devoid of panic, hurry, or the need for grand, theatrical feats of heroism. It approaches monumental tasks by executing one small, precise action at a time, repeatedly, consistently, and without pause. When a colony sets out to construct a massive dam across a rushing stream, they do not conceptualize a finished master plan and work backward. They respond entirely to immediate, localized necessities. If they detect water escaping where it shouldn't, they plug the leak. If a structural branch is required to anchor a section, they place it. If loose mud is needed to seal a gap, they pack it. The grand architectural marvel emerges not from a complex blueprint, but from the accumulated, patient response to 1,000 minor demands, each met in its proper sequence until the collective structure is whole. And yet, against all odds, the finished project holds perfectly. The dam defies the current, the reservoir fills to capacity, the secure lodge stands unyielding against the elements, and the family sleeps inside, warm, safe, and heavily insulated against the most brutal blizzards of the winter solstice. There is an ancient living wisdom in this lifestyle, a philosophy that cannot be written down or calculated, but is instead lived out one branch at a time, one season at a time, for as long as the currents flow and the trees stand tall along the banks. Beavers possess a highly sophisticated, hypersensitive relationship with the acoustic properties of their environment. While it is widely known that the sharp sound of rushing water serves as an irresistible auditory trigger that compels them to immediately repair a dam, their acoustic intelligence extends far deeper into their territory. Research indicates that a resident colony actively recognizes the unique acoustic signature of their own pond, its specific echoes, its unique aquatic rhythms, and its background frequencies. Wildlife biologists have noted that when beavers are exposed to audio playbacks of running water recorded from their own familiar habitat, they remain calm and untroubled. However, the moment a recording of rushing water from an unfamiliar, distant pond is broadcast, they exhibit immediate alert behaviors and investigative responses. Their home has a distinct voice, and they know it intimately. Furthermore, these animals maintain an extensive vocal vocabulary that human ears rarely ever detect. Safe within the thick, insulated walls of the lodge, family members communicate with one another using a series of gentle, low-frequency murmurs, soft hisses, and affectionate whines. The newborn kits are exceptionally talkative, producing high-pitched, thin squeaks that elicit instant, nurturing responses from their nearby parents. These sounds are deeply private and intimate, belonging entirely to the pitch-black sanctuary of the inner chamber where the family coexists, completely insulated from the freezing outer winds, the heavy ice sheets, and the prying eyes of the world above. To realize that these creatures converse in soft, tender tones within the security of their mud fortresses is to experience a deep sense of emotional recognition, a reminder of the universal languages of family, companionship, and the pursuit of warmth. The complex wetlands generated by these animals act as vital lifelines for numerous threatened and endangered species around the globe. Wherever a beaver family slows a current and establishes a thriving reservoir, an immediate, cascading wave of biodiversity follows, offering a critical oasis for creatures that have been systematically driven out of human-altered, channelized landscapes. In the United Kingdom, the historic reintroduction of these engineers to the river systems of Devon and Scotland has triggered a spectacular resurgence in local water vole populations, one of Britain's most rapidly vanishing native mammals. Water voles require slow-moving, deep water banks heavily carpeted with lush vegetation to survive, creating a perfect match for the specific environment a beaver dam generates. Across North America, these engineered pools have been directly linked to the regional recovery of river otters, whose populations plummeted historically alongside the decline of the beavers. Massive moose regularly frequent these wetlands to forage on the highly nutritious, submerged aquatic flora that thrives in the shallow zones of the pond. Wood ducks depend heavily on the hollow cavities of dead standing trees that are naturally created when beaver flooding saturates local groves, while majestic great blue herons stand like motionless, slate-gray monuments in the shallows, waiting with infinite patience to strike at fish swimming through the clear water. Across continental Europe, the return of the Eurasian beaver has provided an immediate lifelines to rare wetland birds, vulnerable amphibians, and specialized aquatic invertebrates. Near-extinct plants that require waterlogged, marshy soils are rapidly recolonizing the fertile zones surrounding these reservoirs, and the European pond tortoise, one of the continent's most critically endangered reptiles, has been documented re-establishing territories within beaver-created wetlands after decades of regional absence. Each dam built is a profound ecological promise, a standing invitation extended across the wilderness to every creature in need of shelter, slow water, and the unique, life-giving abundance that only a healthy wetland can provide. The beaver builds for itself, but the world it constructs belongs to everyone. Throughout human history, the beaver's reputation for methodical, untiring effort has transformed it into a universal emblem of industry and perseverance. Beyond its prominent position across Canadian culture, the image of the beaver is heavily integrated into the identities of elite academic institutions, civic coats of arms, and major corporate logos throughout North America and Europe. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, famously selected the beaver as its official mascot, citing the animal as nature's ultimate engineer, a creature that refines its environment and constructs complex, enduring monuments through applied knowledge and relentless dedication. On the west coast of the United States, the historical fur trade left such a permanent mark on Oregon that the city of Portland remains intimately connected to its neighboring suburb of Beaverton. Across the continent, the official seal of New York City prominently features a beaver, honoring the historic pelt trade that provided the early Dutch colony of New Amsterdam with the foundational wealth required to build a global metropolis. There is a striking, poetic irony in this relationship. The very society that once hunted this creature to the absolute brink of extinction to fuel international fashion trends now proudly uses its likeness to symbolize its most prestigious and industrious institutions. The beaver transitioned from a commercial quarry to a cultural icon, from the edge of oblivion to a symbol of structural excellence. And through all this shifting human symbolism, the animal itself remains entirely unaffected, continuing to glide through the dark, cold waters, maintaining its dams, and remaining utterly absorbed in the simple, ancient, and beautiful business of making a home. The ecological relationship shared between the beaver and the willow tree represents one of the natural world's most elegant coevolutionary partnerships. If a beaver could be said to have a preferred companion in the forest, it is undoubtedly the willow. In return, the willow appears genetically tailored to meet the exact needs of the builder. Flourishing in dense stands along moist riverbanks, willows rank among the fastest-growing trees in temperate climates, capable of producing new shoots with astonishing velocity. When a beaver harvests a willow, felling it all the way down to a raw stump, the tree does not perish. Instead, the remaining stump responds by rapidly coppicing, sprouting a dense cluster of vibrant new shoots within a matter of weeks, which mature into harvestable branches in just a year or two. Consequently, a resident colony does not permanently deplete its local timber supplies through its heavy foraging. Rather, its logging activities actively stimulate more aggressive, dense willow growth. By feeding on the tree, the beaver creates a more tightly branched, shrub-like growth habit that provides an endlessly renewable, self-sustaining food source for subsequent generations. Simultaneously, these flourishing willow networks act as powerful natural stabilizers for the riverbanks, their deep, webbed root systems gripping the soil to resist erosion. Their overhanging canopies cast deep shade that keeps water temperatures cool and oxygen-rich, while their discarded autumn leaves drop into the currents to provide a foundational nutrient supply that feeds the entire aquatic food chain through the dead of winter. Builder and tree, animal and flora, they stand as ancient companions along every wild waterway, each actively shaping the biology and evolution of the other since long before human footsteps ever echoed through the valleys. A mature beaver pond represents one of the most structurally complex and biologically dense ecosystems a freshwater stream can ever become. To truly appreciate this environmental masterpiece, imagine floating silently across the surface of a secluded reservoir on a warm, golden summer evening, taking a careful inventory of the life vibrating around you. Along the muddy shoreline, where the soil is soft and carpeted with thick moss, wild frogs rest upon every available log and lily pad. Green frogs, massive bullfrogs, and striking leopard frogs broadcast their localized calls, their voices overlapping and weaving together into a dense, primordial symphony that resonates over the water. In the sun-warmed shallows, predatory dragonfly nymphs cruise through the dense tangles of submerged stems, while above the surface, magnificent adult dragonflies patrol their aerial territories in rapid flashes of iridescent color, hovering, darting, and suspending themselves in mid-air with impossible aerodynamic precision. Beneath the glassy surface, the water column is packed with an invisible universe of life. Specialized caddisfly larvae navigate the floor in their tiny, handmade protective cases constructed from twigs and sand grains. Delicate mayfly nymphs cling tightly to underwater stones, and predatory water beetles row through the green-lit aquatic forests using their hind legs like miniature oars. Schools of vibrant sunfish, perch, and juvenile trout hang motionless in the currents or press themselves deep into the protective embrace of tangled root masses along the bank. High above, agile swallows cut low, elegant arcs across the sky, scooping up insects directly from the air. A brilliant, electric blue kingfisher perches motionless on a dead, silver branch overlooking the pool, waiting with absolute stillness before dropping like a stone into the water, emerging a split second later with a shimmering fish clamped in its beak before vanishing upstream. And at the absolute center of this magnificent explosion of abundance cruises the silent, dark form of the engineer. A soft, V-shaped wake expands from its passage, gently rocking the floating lilies along the margin. It is the architect navigating the empire it constructed from nothing, belonging to it entirely, a living heart beating at the center of an ecosystem that would simply cease to exist without it. Long before human architects conceptualized the principles of structural engineering, the beaver was executing what modern science now celebrates as biomimicry. In recent centuries, human engineers have frequently turned to the design of beaver dams as a source of direct inspiration for managing volatile water systems. The fundamental design of a natural dam, a permeable, flexible matrix of wood and mud that deliberately slows a current without completely blocking it, allowing controlled seepage while maintaining a reliably stable upstream reservoir, is an incredibly sophisticated hydrological achievement. Indigenous nations across North America historically mirrored these exact principles, weaving intricate, flexible stick structures across rivers to create sustainable fish traps that allowed strong currents to pass safely through while trapping migrating fish. Similarly, early European mill dams relied on comparable porous foundations to establish stable, reliable mill ponds without triggering catastrophic structural blowouts during seasonal floods. In our modern era of climate adaptation, water managers are increasingly installing artificial leaky dams constructed from logs, brushwood, and soil along upland streams to naturally slow storm runoffs, mitigate flash flooding, and trap agricultural sediments before they reach major valleys. In regions where wild colonies have not yet established themselves, conservation groups are intentionally building these exact structures to kickstart ecological healing. They call these human-made installations beaver dam analogs, a title that reveals everything. Humanity is actively constructing imitations of an environmental solution that a humble rodent perfected millions of years before our species ever learned to build. The geometric precision with which an experienced beaver can fell a massive forest tree remains one of the most stunning testaments to mammalian capability. Armed with nothing but their self-sharpening, iron-enriched incisors, these animals cut through dense hardwood trunks that would give a human logger pause. A mature adult can completely fell a young aspen with a trunk diameter of 20 centimeters in under 15 minutes. They execute this work with a highly strategic technique, making alternating, angled cuts into the wood that gradually carve out an hourglass-shaped indentation, the unmistakable hallmark of beaver territory. The specific geometry of these deep cuts dictates the final trajectory of the falling timber. Veteran builders demonstrate a sophisticated awareness of their terrain and gravity. Trees growing immediately along the shoreline are consistently gnawed so that they tilt and crash directly into the main pond, drastically minimizing the exhausting overland dragging required to harvest the branches. When logging further inland, they carefully fell trees into existing natural clearings in the canopy to prevent the timber from becoming caught in the upper branches of neighboring trees. While this behavior is driven by hardwired evolutionary feedback rather than conscious human planning, the results are remarkably deliberate and efficient. the largest tree ever documented in scientific records as being felled by a wild beaver featured an incredible trunk diameter of over 100 centimeters, a truly monumental forest giant. Whether this project proved overly ambitious or was successfully processed by the colony, the historic stump stands as a monument to the sheer strength of their teeth and the limitless persistence of their effort. Let us return once more to the absolute edge of sleep, standing quietly along the margin of the great wetland in the deepest hours of the winter night. The sky overhead is a dense, cold, velvety blue, packed with 1,000 silent stars. The air is completely still. The only sound breaking the midnight silence is the faint, rhythmic trickle of water spilling softly over a low point of the dam somewhere behind us, and far across the frozen expanse of the pond, the continuous, patient sound of gnawing. The builder is hard at work in the darkness, moving at the exact same pace it did yesterday, and the exact same pace it will maintain tomorrow. There is no urgency in the sound, no frantic hurry, just the slow, reassuring rhythm of an animal executing the exact purpose it was designed to fulfill in the cold, dark, and wild spaces of the world. One branch at a time, the constellations drift overhead with a slow majesty that defies human perception. The great pond breathes. The frogs have fallen silent for the season, and a thin, white mist begins to curl off the water's surface, twisting into unnameable shapes before dissolving into the night air. Inside the dry, warm interior of the lodge, visible only as a dark, snow-dusted silhouette rising from the center of the pool, the young kits are fast asleep. They are curled tightly together in a single, soft mound of fur, breathing in slow, perfectly even rhythms. The working parent will return to the safety of the fortress long before the first light of dawn fractures the eastern sky. It will slide effortlessly through the near-freezing depths, dive beneath the surface ice, navigate the submerged entry tunnel, and shake the water from its coat as it emerges into the dry living chamber. It will curl up tightly beside the sleeping kits, its heavy body radiating warmth, its engineering duties completed for the night, and the great wetland will remain completely still around them, the mist rising and fading, the stars turning silently in the deep, and the water lapping very gently against the logs of the dam. The brave architectural decisions of these animals carry an unexpected chapter in the annals of early human medicine. Long before the advent of modern pharmacology, the beaver was the subject of extraordinary, highly creative medical law throughout medieval and early modern Europe. Central to this ancient practice was castoreum, the rich, complex molecular cocktail synthesized within paired specialized sacs near the base of the tail. For centuries, European physicians and ancient healers revered castoreum as a near-universal panacea, prescribing it with absolute confidence to treat a bewildering array of human ailments. It was administered in the form of concentrated tinctures, dried powders, and dense pills to combat debilitating headaches, mitigate epilepsy, soothe toothaches, and break dangerous fevers. When rubbed directly onto the skin, it served as a topical salve for severe dermatological conditions. The legendary physician Hippocrates himself may have written of its virtues, and its purported healing properties were documented extensively across the medical literature of numerous ancient cultures. While this historical reliance on a wild wildlife extract might sound like pure medieval superstition, modern biochemical analysis has revealed a startling validation of these ancient remedies. Chemical screening confirms that pristine castoreum contains significant quantities of salicylates, the precise active compounds that form the foundational basis of modern aspirin. This is not a biological coincidence. These compounds are directly derived from the salicylic acid-rich willow bark that constitutes the primary, preferred diet of the builders. Consequently, castoreum harvested from animals that had been actively foraging on native willow stands possessed genuine, measurable anti-inflammatory, and pain-relieving properties. It was far from a miraculous universal cure, yet it was distinctly non-placebo and biologically active. The medieval physicians, operating entirely without the benefit of organic chemistry, clinical trials, or microscopic insights, had accurately observed a tangible therapeutic reality. The industrious animal, simply by consuming its favorite riverside trees, inadvertently concentrated the willow's natural medicine within its own body. Humanity, in its signature resourcefulness, unlocked that chemical secret and transformed the territorial signpost of a wild rodent into an ancient pharmacy. To truly appreciate the lifestyle of these architects, one must recognize that they perceive and navigate their surroundings through a sensory matrix fundamentally different from our own. The beaver's sensory universe is meticulously tailored to the dual demands of an amphibious existence split precariously between solid ground and dark, rushing water. Operating primarily under the cover of night, they execute their complex logging and construction tasks by relying on touch and scent maps far more than raw visual acuity. Their eyes are positioned laterally on the sides of their skull rather than forward-facing. While this anatomical placement compromises their depth perception, it grants them an exceptionally wide, panoramic field of view, a brilliant evolutionary adaptation optimized for detecting the slightest peripheral movement or the stealthy approach of a land-bound predator. Furthermore, while their standard color vision is remarkably limited compared to human sight, their eyes possess a heightened sensitivity to ultraviolet light. Under the silver glow of midnight, they can likely perceive intricate patterns, territorial markings, and environmental tracks that remain completely invisible to the human eye. Yet, the true crown jewel of their sensory biology is an incredibly sophisticated, hyper-developed olfactory system. Scent is the primary language through which a beaver reads the complex social landscape of its watershed. By drawing aromas deep into its nasal cavities, an animal can instantly deduce exactly who has crossed its boundaries, how many hours have elapsed since they stood on that spot, their gender, their precise state of health, and their current reproductive readiness. Complementing this chemical awareness is an exquisitely sensitive sense of touch. The animal's uniquely adapted lips, which are capable of sealing tightly behind the massive incisors to keep water out while gnawing under the surface, are densely packed with highly specialized sensory cells. By pressing its lips against raw timber, a beaver can instantly assess the texture of the wood, differentiate between tree species by touch and taste, and determine whether a specific branch is better suited for immediate consumption or structural dam reinforcement, all while actively chewing. Their nimble front paws exhibit a matching dexterity, manipulating delicate twigs and heavy rocks with a fluid precision that consistently stuns human observers. The beaver coexists with us in the physical world, yet it inhabits an experiential reality we can only partially imagine, a realm governed by invisible chemical signposts, the tactile texture of bark against moving lips, the low-frequency music of moving water, the dark warmth of the mud lodge, and the cold, silver currents flowing silently beneath the winter ice. The popular imagination often reduces the beaver to a beautiful, but essentially simple caricature, a tireless, automated biological machine programmed exclusively to fell timber and plug leaks. However, modern ecological research into their social behavior paints a vastly more complex, emotionally nuanced portrait of family life within the colony. A beaver family group is not a uniform workforce. Rather, it is comprised of distinct individuals possessing unique personalities and specialized behavioral roles. Within a single colony, certain beavers consistently emerge as bolder, more inquisitive individuals who are significantly more likely to investigate novel objects or territory changes. Others display a deeply cautious, risk-averse temperament. These personality traits often translate into occupational specializations. Specific family members exhibit a dedication to the heavy, structural maintenance of the primary dam, while their siblings focus their daily energies on overland foraging and trail blazing. At the center of this social architecture stands the alpha pair, whose lifelong monogamous bond is defined by genuine coordination, mutual responsiveness, and deep emotional symmetry. Long-term mates regularly engage in what researchers define as social grooming, perching closely together on a submerged log or muddy bank, carefully working through each other's thick fur with their specialized claws. This intimate ritual serves a dual evolutionary purpose. It maintains the flawless, waterproof structure of the coat while continuously reinforcing the psychological bonds of the partnership. Pairs that have navigated the changing seasons together for many years move through their home waters with a seamless, synchronized grace that speaks to deep familiarity. Each partner anticipates the other's movements, coordinates tasks without conflict, and demonstrates an implicit trust in the other's structural decisions. The profound depth of this connection becomes hauntingly apparent when a long-established mate is suddenly removed or perishes. The surviving partner exhibits immediate, measurable signs of psychological and behavioral disruption. They experience drastic shifts in their daily activity patterns, showcase elevated anxiety behaviors, and frequently abandon critical dam maintenance during the initial period of loss. The sudden absence of a partner leaves a gaping fracture in the functional and social machinery of the colony that takes months to heal. While scientists traditionally hesitate to ascribe the heavy human word grief to wildlife, the profound, measurable disruption that follows the death of a mate confirms that the attachments these builders form transcend mere reproductive utility. Their bonds are deeply rooted in a shared lifetime of companionship and mutual reliance. While humanity often views itself as the ultimate architect of the natural world, the structural lineage of the beaver boasts an antiquity that dwarfs our species' entire existence. The evolutionary history of the family Castoridae stretches back over an astonishing 30 million years into the deep theater of geological time. The earliest fossil records attributable to primitive castrid rodents emerge from rock strata dating to the late Eocene epoch, approximately 33 to 34 million years ago. Over the tens of millions of years that followed, this ancient family branched into a magnificent diversity of forms, many of which looked and lived quite differently than the contemporary builders of our modern wetlands. Certain prehistoric relatives were entirely terrestrial burrowers rather than wetland architects, using their powerful front limbs to sculpt elaborate corkscrew-shaped spiral tunnels deep within dry, arid plains. Others adapted to primeval, low-oxygen swamplands, developing specialized skeletal frames optimized for a purely aquatic, nomadic lifestyle. The specific genus Castor, which encapsulates the direct, line-of-sight ancestors of the modern beavers working today, makes its grand entrance in the fossil record roughly 7 million years ago during the Miocene epoch. From that profound evolutionary turning point, the lineage extends in a magnificent, unbroken line straight to the animal currently dragging an aspen branch across a quiet pond. Consider the sheer weight of that timeline. 7 million years of uninterrupted dam construction, 7 million years of meticulously insulating lodges and caching green timber against the freeze, 7 million years of iron-enriched orange teeth gnawing through hardwood trunks in the pitch-black hours of the night. The beaver is a grand survivor that has outlasted the changing of worlds. It quietly watched the rise and fall of the monumental woolly mammoths that once grazed beside its ponds. It outlived the ferocious giant cave bears, the predatory saber-toothed cats, and the colossal ground sloths of the Pleistocene epoch. It successfully navigated sweeping global ice ages, intense warming periods, and the volatile arrival of our own industrious species. And through every catastrophic extinction event and climate shift, the beaver simply kept doing what it was born to do. It maintained the exact same elegant solution to the exact same environmental problem, Water is inherently easier to survive beside if you possess the courage to control it. A dam across the current, a deep reservoir behind it, a secure lodge in the center, and a family safe inside. It is a lifestyle that is simple, ancient, astonishingly effective, and still going strong. The structural influence of these animals extends far beyond the borders of their immediate territories, altering the fundamental hydrology and water cycles of entire continental river networks. A watershed populated by vibrant, active beaver colonies behaves in a structurally superior manner compared to one that has been stripped of its builders. The presence of these natural reservoirs radically transforms the river's hydrograph, the seasonal pattern of how its water volume rises and falls across the year. By flattening the volatile extremes of nature, beaver dams act as a giant, continental shock absorber. During intense, catastrophic rain events or rapid spring snowmelts, the millions of small dams scattered across the upper tributaries catch and hold back the rushing torrents, storing the energy within thousands of localized pools before it can converge into the main river channel. This decentralized buffering action drastically reduces the peak flow velocity, smoothing out the flood pulse and protecting downstream human valleys from devastating inundations. Conversely, the immense water reserves trapped within these ponds and saturated into the surrounding water tables are not held indefinitely. They are released with slow, measured precision throughout the parched months that follow. During late summer droughts, when unmanaged rivers shrink to stagnant, disconnected pools, beaver-maintained watersheds continuously bleed clean, chilled water back into the river channels, maintaining vital minimum flows. Under their stewardship, the river breathes more evenly, more steadily, and more reliably, simply because 1,000 natural engineers are holding its breath in the highlands upstream. In an era defined by severe climate volatility, where catastrophic flooding and prolonged droughts pose existential threats to human infrastructure, government bodies and environmental managers across Europe and North America are finally looking past traditional concrete engineering. Major public funding initiatives are currently active in several countries to actively incentivize and accelerate the return of these rodents to historic river basins. The living, working, self-healing infrastructure of the watershed is being systematically reinstated after centuries of tragic absence, and the continent's rivers are slowly beginning to breathe easy once more. There is a distinct, mesmerizing soundscape that belongs exclusively to the late-night hours in the wild wetlands of the northern world. It is the hypnotic melody of wood being carved by living teeth, far removed from the sharp, echoing crack of a steel axe or the jarring whine of a modern chainsaw. The beaver's logging operation is characterized by a soft, highly rhythmic, and patient scraping. It is a sound with an innate, unhurried tempo built directly into its frequency, a steady acoustic testament that the timeless work of the wilderness continues without panic, confirming that what needs to be accomplished will be done in its proper sequence. If you stand perfectly still along the bank and listen beneath that steady gnawing, your ears will catch the foundational backing music of the pond itself, the low, continuous melody of moving water. It is the liquid sound of currents sliding gently over smooth stones, the soft lapping of small waves against weathered lodge logs, and the slow, deep breathing of a healthy wetland cloaked in darkness. These specific acoustic rhythms have accompanied the nights of our planet for longer than the human species has existed to hear them. There is an immense, therapeutic comfort to be found in that realization. There is a profound peace in knowing that this exact symphony was playing out in the forgotten dark millions of years before our ancestors ever walked the earth, and that, given proper conservation, care, and the passage of time, it will continue playing long after our own busy lives have faded into history. The patient builder gnawing under the stars, the great pond breathing, and the family sleeping curled together in the heavy warmth of the inner lodge, ancient, continuous, and gloriously unhurried. A beaver pond is far more than a physical barrier made of wood and mud. It functions as a highly complex, dynamic chemical reactor shaped and maintained by the collective biology of everything that coexists within its borders. The moment a rushing stream enters the quiet expanse of the reservoir, its chemical composition changes dramatically. The sudden deceleration of the current forces the water column to stratify, creating a multi-layered environment where warm, sunlit surface waters hold lower concentrations of dissolved oxygen, while the deep, dark bottom currents develop entirely unique chemical parameters. Within the thick, oxygen-poor sediment beds at the bottom of the pond, specialized anaerobic bacteria flourish in astronomical numbers. These microorganisms break down trapped organic leaves, wood debris, and agricultural runoff through chemical pathways that slow down decomposition while generating significant quantities of methane gas. This specific biochemical process explains why old beaver pond sediments are so incredibly rich in partially decomposed organic history, serving as a massive localized carbon store. Yet, because these low-oxygen environments simultaneously release methane, a potent greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere, the relationship between beavers and modern climate accounting is genuinely complex and multifaceted. Atmospheric scientists and ecologists are working intensely to map the precise balance between these two competing forces, striving to calculate the full, net accounting of the beaver's role in the global carbon cycle. What remains indisputably clear is that a beaver pond is never a passive, stagnant body of water. It is a living, breathing chemical laboratory, a complex environmental reactor in which the continuous interactions of water, sediment, decaying organic matter, bacteria, plants, and animals establish highly productive conditions that no human engineer could ever design from scratch. The humble rodent possesses no understanding of organic chemistry, yet it seamlessly builds a grand chemical engine into every dam it constructs, every pool it fills, and every soft, dark mud bed it carves into the earth. One of the most captivating aspects of studying these animals over expansive, geological timescales is the permanent, indelible marks their lifestyle leaves upon the physical geography of the earth, traces that outlast the individual colonies by thousands of years. A beaver pond is never a permanent feature. Eventually, after decades or centuries of continuous occupancy, the colony will naturally move on when the surrounding forest timber supply is exhausted, or the ancient dam will experience a structural failure and slowly drain. When the water recedes, the former reservoir does not vanish into the woods. Instead, it transitions into what ecologists celebrate as a beaver meadow. What remains behind is a perfectly flat, bowl-shaped valley floor blanketed with a deep, ultra-rich layer of organic-laden sediment that accumulated silently over generations of pond history. These historical meadows rank among the most fertile, hyper-productive small ecosystems in the entire temperate world. Native grasses and sedges colonize the basin with extraordinary density, while vibrant displays of wild wildflowers explode along the moist perimeters. The soil within these meadows is soft, dark, and incredibly deep, standing in stark, dramatic contrast to the thin, stony, and nutrient-poor topsoils of the surrounding upland forests. By drilling specialized pollen cores deep into these ancient beaver meadow sediments, modern paleoclimatologists can read the entire ecological history of the surrounding continent, layer by layer, year by year, stretching back through thousands of years of deep time. Within these extracted cores, researchers can precisely identify the distinct, dark bands of organic pond sediment characteristic of still, managed water, mapping out the exact centuries when beavers were actively managing the valley. The historical absence of the animals leaves an equally clear signature, recorded in the changing texture and chemical composition of the accumulating earth. Long after the waters have drained, the dams have rotted, and the original builders have slipped into antiquity, the earth itself remembers the beaver. preserving their legacy in the unique shape of its valleys, the flatness of its pastures, the exceptional fertility of its soils, and the ancient pollen trapped deep within the mud that tells the silent story of what grew, bloomed, and thrived while the dam held, the reservoir filled, and the beaver family slept safely through the cold winter nights. Long before the arrival of the European fur trade transformed the human-beaver dynamic into a devastating system of commercial extraction, the indigenous nations of North America had forged a deep, sophisticated relationship with the beaver that spanned thousands of consecutive years. For these diverse cultures, the beaver was a vital, respected resource. Its rich, nutritious meat provided a reliable source of protein throughout the lean winter months. Its thick pelt was harvested to fashion durable clothing and facilitate tribal trade, and its specialized castor glands were carefully utilized for their potent medicinal applications. Yet, this ancient relationship extended far beyond the realms of practical utility. Within the complex cosmologies and oral traditions of many First Nations, the beaver occupied a sacred, highly revered position. Among the Ojibwe, the Cree, and numerous other Algonquian-speaking peoples, the animal was celebrated as a living symbol of industry, foresight, and the virtue of careful preparation. Tribal elders passed down stories that honored the beaver not as a simple quarry, but as a profound teacher, a creature demonstrating through its daily rhythms the cultural values of hard work, long-term planning, and the wisdom of living harmoniously within the boundaries of one's natural ecosystem. This deep respect was directly reflected in highly sophisticated, sustainable hunting protocols. Indigenous hunters abided by strict cultural laws designed to ensure that wild colonies were never overexploited or permanently depleted. Specific pond networks were deliberately managed and protected over generations to guarantee a continuous, healthy beaver presence across the tribal lands. In many traditions, the bones of beavers harvested for food were returned to the water with solemn ceremonies, a ritual practice that seamlessly blended practical wildlife management with deep spiritual meaning. These ancient customs encoded a wealth of ecological data regarding wetland conservation, insights that human scientists would take centuries to formally discover, validate, and translate into the rigid language of modern ecology. Consequently, the rapid commercial destruction of the beaver populations by European fur traders during the colonial era was far more than an environmental catastrophe. It was a profound cultural crisis that fractured the living traditions of human societies, whose entire understanding of the wilderness was built upon generations of coexistence with this animal. The modern recovery and return of the beaver across the continent is therefore more than an ecological triumph. It represents, in its own beautiful way, the slow healing and recovery of an ancient human-animal relationship. In the contemporary spaces where these natural engineers have successfully reclaimed their historic waterways, a quiet, contemplative industry has quietly blossomed around the simple, unhurried act of beaver watching. Across the riverbanks of Devon and the wild glens of Scotland, guided evening excursions draw thousands of visitors out into the elements during the golden hour just before dusk. They gather along the water's edge to stand perfectly still, hushed and expectant. The act of waiting is a fundamental component of the experience. It forces a human being to consciously slow their frantic modern pace, shedding the anxieties of the digital world to match the deliberate, ancient tempo of the wilderness. And then, almost always without warning, the magic unfolds. A dark, sleek silhouette punctures the mirror-like surface of the pond, and a perfect, V-shaped wake begins to ripple across the twilight water. The beaver cruises with absolute, unhurried purpose toward the shoreline. It pulls its stocky, heavy frame free from the current and onto the muddy bank, sitting upright for a brief, watchful moment as its black nose works the evening air, reading the wind. Satisfied, it settles into its work and begins to gnaw. On the opposite bank, The human watchers stand frozen in absolute fascination, barely daring to breathe as they witness one of the most ordinary, yet utterly extraordinary spectacles on Earth. A wild creature executing the exact task it was born to perform, standing beside the water it built, enveloped in the evening it completely owns. There is an intensely meditative, therapeutic quality to this slow tourism that draws people back to the riverbanks again and again. The unhurried nature of the beaver's movements, the relentless, patient quality of its labor, and the total, blissful absorption of the animal within its immediate task induces a corresponding state of deep, quiet attention within the watcher. You find your heart rate settling, your breathing slowing down, and your internal thoughts fading away into a peaceful stillness. The ancient pond, the working beaver, and the fading twilight become, for that beautiful interval, entirely enough. Despite the beaver's long history of close contact with human civilization and its prominent position within wildlife research, significant chapters of its basic biology remain surprisingly underexplored by modern science. Chief among these mysteries is the inner functioning of its immune system and disease resistance. Beavers spend the entirety of their lives submerged in still, slow-moving wetland waters, an environmental medium that naturally serves as a hyperproductive breeding ground for waterborne pathogens, parasites, and viruses of every conceivable variety. Yet, despite constant exposure to these microscopic threats, wild beavers remain remarkably robust, resilient, and structurally healthy within their natural habitats. One specific pathogen permanently intertwined with their reputation is Giardia, a microscopic parasitic protozoan that was historically labeled with the colloquial nickname beaver fever. For generations, it was widely and unfairly believed that beavers were the primary culprits responsible for contaminating pristine wilderness water sources with this intestinal parasite through their waste. Modern veterinary medicine and epidemiological tracking have thoroughly corrected this misconception. It is now definitively established that Giardia is a ubiquitous parasite carried and shed by a vast spectrum of warm-blooded mammals, including wild deer, domestic dogs, and human hikers themselves. The industrious beaver is no more or less responsible for the presence of the parasite in regional waterways than any other form of native wildlife. Yet, the unfair reputational damage has endured on ingredient labels and trail warnings for decades. What scientists have discovered is that beavers develop an incredibly strong, localized immunity to the specific pathogens they encounter daily within their home pools, and that their overall physical health is mirror-linked to the environmental quality of their watershed. Colonies confined to degraded, heavily polluted, or human-channelized waterways showcase significantly higher rates of disease and poor coat condition, while those allowed to manage clean, well-functioning, and structurally complex wetland ecosystems display a powerful, natural vitality that keeps them pond-worthy across a long lifetime of labor. The environmental stewardship of the beaver extends into the skies above their habitats, demonstrating how deeply their health and the structural integrity of the water they inhabit are interconnected. They belong to a highly exclusive group of animals capable of actively modifying the local climate around their territories. Beyond simply creating cooler, moister microclimates in their immediate vicinity through physical engineering, the continuous evaporation of water from the wide surface of a beaver pond systematically releases water vapor directly into the local atmosphere. This process drives up humidity levels not only directly over the pool, but throughout the surrounding woodlands. This localized atmospheric enrichment has profound ecological cascading effects. Precipitation and hydration. The elevated atmospheric moisture measurably increases the probability of localized rainfall and morning dew formation. Soil preservation. This humidity significantly slows the rate at which adjacent forest soils dry out during periods of intense heat. Drought resilience. It establishes an environmental cushion that permits a wider variety of plant species to survive extended dry spells. In arid and semi-arid landscapes, these microclimatic transformations become vital for survival. Rigorous field research conducted across the American West has demonstrated that the lush riparian zones anchored by beaver ponds remain vibrant, green, and highly productive deep into brutal summer droughts. While the unmanaged surrounding landscape completely browns and dries up, these resilient green ribbons of vegetation along beaver-managed streams function as critical oasis refuges. They offer life-saving sanctuary to insects, migratory birds, reptiles, and small mammals during the most challenging months of the year. So profound is this impact that some researchers have proposed that a sufficiently dense, interconnected network of beaver ponds spanning an entire watershed could mathematically scale up to measurably increase local regional rainfall by continuously pump priming the atmosphere with extra moisture. While this concept remains speculative and would require a vast geographic footprint of active colonies to manifest, it is a scientifically plausible mechanism. It introduces an astonishing dimension to the ecological accounting of the species. They do not merely curate and manage water on the Earth's surface. They may also, in a quiet and uncredited way, encourage water to fall directly from the sky. A beaver's entire landscape strategy is guided by an intense, innate attraction to the sound of moving water. While it has long been understood that the sound of a leak or a running current serves as a primary behavioral trigger for dam building, this sensory relationship runs far deeper than a simple, robotic reflex. Field observations indicate that beavers select their construction sites preferentially, targeting specific locations along a stream where the distinct acoustic signature of the water matches highly refined internal parameters. These parameters likely correspond to the volume of the flow, the precise level of turbulence, and the specific sound frequencies generated by moving water within different channel geometries. This hyper-attuned acoustic sensitivity perfectly explains why beaver dams consistently appear at locations that are, from a strict hydraulic engineering perspective, genuinely optimal dam sites. The narrowing of a stream channel, a sharp change in gradient, or the presence of a natural rock lip along the stream bed all synthesize unique, high-frequency sound signatures. Over millions of years of natural selection, the beaver's nervous system has been exquisitely calibrated to find these exact auditory patterns irresistibly attractive. In essence, a beaver hears the latent structural potential of a dam site long before it evaluates it visually. The water calls out to the animal, and it answers the river's invitation with mud and sticks. This phenomenon highlights the beauty of beaver cognition. The animal is not consciously calculating complex hydrology or drafting architectural plans. Yet, the physical outcomes of its instinctual labor are so masterfully suited to the engineering demands of the site that human observers must constantly remind themselves that they are witnessing pure evolutionary instinct rather than conscious intentionality. The river speaks, the builder listens, and between them, an entire wetland ecosystem is born. While tracking individual wild beavers over decades requires intensive, long-term monitoring and radio collaring efforts, compiled data reveals that these medium-sized mammals possess a remarkable natural longevity. In the wild, beavers regularly live between 10 and 15 years, with the oldest confirmed wild individuals approaching an astonishing 24 years of age. Though captive individuals can survive somewhat longer due to the complete elimination of predators, harsh winters, and territorial dispersal risks, it is in the wild, fully engaged in the complex management of their habitats, that this longevity carries profound ecological meaning. Consider the life history of a 15-year-old wild matriarch or patriarch. This animal has successfully navigated a decade and a half of grueling winters, defended its territory from predators, and raised multiple generations of kits. It has personally felled thousands of trees and packed countless handfuls of mud into the structural barriers defining its domain. By the time a builder reaches this venerable age, its home pond has matured into an incredibly rich, complex ecosystem. Botanical selection. The surrounding forest plant composition has been completely reshaped by 15 years of the beaver's highly specific foraging choices and logging preferences. Sediment stratification. The dark bed of the reservoir is layered with a decade and a half of accumulated organic matter, creating a rich history of the valley's climate. Navigational canals. If the site is highly productive, a massive hand-carved canal system will have been dug out, reaching deep into the surrounding woodland to facilitate transport. The old beaver and its pond grow old together, each dynamically shaping the other, both carrying the physical marks of a long, deeply intertwined history. For a significant portion of their global range, extreme cold stands as the defining environmental challenge of a beaver's life. They face northern winters that can lock down a landscape for 6 consecutive months, forming thick sheets of ice over the pond that completely seal off the lodge entrances and plunging ambient temperatures to levels that would kill an unprotected mammal within a matter of hours. Yet, the beaver's relationship with this brutal season is defined by supreme biological elegance. The animal does not merely tolerate the freeze, it has engineered a lifestyle that is actively made possible by the cold. Rather than acting as a hostile barrier, a frozen pond functions as a highly secure structural roof. This icy layer seals large land-bound predators out while trapping vital heat within the water column below. As freezing air solidifies the thick mud walls of the lodge, the structure becomes significantly stronger, transforming into an impenetrable, concrete-like fortress against wolves and wolverines. The exact same cold that preserves their submerged winter food cache of green branches is the very force that keeps predators from breaching the family sanctuary above the water. The beaver has brilliantly inverted the harshest feature of its climate, turning it into its greatest tactical defense. When spring finally cracks the ice open, the family emerges with a calculated mixture of caution and revitalized energy. Lean and thinned out from months of relying on a depleting underwater cache, their bodies are hungry but ready. As the streams open up, native willows burst with new leaves and aquatic vegetation begins its seasonal surge, signaling an immediate need for structural maintenance. The shifting frost and spring thaws invariably cause dams to settle and shift, requiring rigorous inspection and rapid repair. Without a shred of drama or complaint, the animals immediately return to their timeless labor, placing one branch and one handful of mud at a time into the lengthening spring days, preparing the world for the new kits that will be born in a few short weeks. The scientific classifications assigned to these animals serve as linguistic time capsules, preserving centuries of human awe, trade, and cross-cultural encounter. The North American beaver bears the scientific name Castor canadensis. The genus name Castor traces its roots back through Latin to the ancient Greek castor, which itself connects directly to the older Sanskrit word castori, translating directly to musk. This nomenclature is a direct, cross-linguistic acknowledgement of the potent, aromatic scent profiles produced by the animal's specialized castor glands, a thread of human recognition running uninterrupted from the ancient world to contemporary biology. Furthermore, Castor honors classical mythology as the name of one of the twin stars in the constellation Gemini, representing one of the legendary twin heroes of Greek lore. The word has accumulated layers of cultural and scientific meaning across millennia, much like the rich layers of sediment settling slowly behind a woodland dam. The species designation, canadensis, translates simply to of Canada, forever anchoring the animal's identity to the very country it fundamentally helped shape through its role in history and geography. Across the Atlantic, the Eurasian beaver is classified as castor fiber. The The specific descriptor fiber is derived from the classical Latin term for beaver, which etymologists believe traces back to an ancient root word associated with flowing water. Two distinct names across two vast continents, yet both threads lead back to the exact same ancient source. The oldest encounters between humanity and this patient, orange-toothed engineer of the global wetlands. Names are the primary tools by which our species claims a relationship with the natural world, and we have been naming the beaver for a very long time. Every anatomical facet of the beaver's body represents a masterpiece of evolutionary specialization, meticulously engineered for a life dedicated entirely to water. Viewed as a single, holistic piece of biological design, the animal's physical form is dense, compact, low-slung, and remarkably heavy, concentrating its primary structural mass within the chest and hindquarters. This specific center of gravity grants them exceptional stability while navigating turbulent currents and provides essential ballast for deep, controlled diving. Their short limbs drastically minimize hydrodynamic drag while swimming, while their large, rounded head presses smoothly forward through the water column without resistance. From the outer tip of its water-repellent fur to the deepest chambers of its skeletal and cardiovascular systems, the beaver is a creature entirely made for the water, and the water, in beautiful reciprocity, is physically remade by the beaver. The historical journey of beaver conservation provides a stark, invaluable lesson regarding the silent psychological losses that occur when a keystone species is erased from a landscape. The near extinction of the beaver, followed by the slow, modern realization of what their absence cost our ecosystems, stands as a premier example of what ecologists term a shifting baseline. Each successive generation of scientists, land managers, and citizens inherently evaluates the natural world using the specific environment they grew up with as the default standard. For generations of people raised alongside British rivers that had been completely emptied of beavers, the degraded, heavily channelized, and ecologically impoverished streams they inherited were simply accepted as normal rivers. That was what a river looked like, how a river behaved, and what a river was fundamentally supposed to be. The historical reality that these exact waterways had once been vibrant, dynamic networks of sprawling beaver ponds, rich wetlands, and slow-moving secondary channels teeming with wildlife, was entirely absent from the collective cultural picture. Dismantling this false baseline required the meticulous detective work of historical ecology, cross-referencing ancient paleontological records, analyzing old legal documents, and drilling deep pollen cores to reconstruct the true ancestral landscape. With that scientific reconstruction came a paradigm shift, the realization that we do not have to accept a degraded status quo. It unlocked the possibility of genuine ecological restoration, bringing back not merely a charismatic animal, but the entire self-sustaining environmental engine it creates, maintains, and inhabits. The beaver stands as a living reminder that the world we inhabit is never a fixed, final, or unalterable truth. It is simply a temporary condition, shaped entirely by what we choose to keep and what we allow to be lost. By entering a stream and placing a single branch against the current, the beaver models a profound truth. Anything worth having can be built from nothing but patience, instinct, and steady, repeated effort.